To many, Buddhism is seen as a staple of Eastern culture, represented most strongly in the country of China. Buddhism was originally a very radical idea for that country, going against many norms of society and even going head-to-head with both Taoism and Confucianism. Through many centuries and many rebellions, it stood strong, changing to fit the Chinese culture. It survived and today is a big part of Chinese culture and life. When Buddhism was first introduced in China, the country was already a well-developed culture. The nation was an empire ruled by many different traditions and ways of thinking. The philosophical traditions of Confucianism and Taoism had already entered Chinese life. It was because of these values and traditions that Buddhism didn't gain instant popularity. Buddhism's traditions were also at odds with typical Chinese culture. For instance, in order to take refuge in the Sangha, men would be forced to leave their families. The Chinese held family relations with the highest regard, and so the idea that the family distracted Buddhists from enlightenment was radical and unacceptable. As the Chinese grew more comfortable with Buddhism, they started to incorporate elements of Confucianism, Taoism, and traditions from local spirit cults into their practice in an effort to make Buddhism more acceptable. In later dynasties, the Chinese opened up multiple philosophical schools that advocated different meditations and promoted a mixture of mainstream and Mahayana texts. The later Han Dynasty did much to advance Buddhism. It was during this time that the first translations of Indian Buddhist texts occurred, but due to their poor understanding of Buddhism at the time, many mistranslations occurred in the texts. Words like Tao were used to mean Bodhi, Yoga, Dharma, and Marga, even though they each carried their own specific distinct meaning. The 2nd century also saw the rise of the first Buddhist monasteries in China. Even after the fall of the later Han Dynasty, many peasants and lower bureaucrats still converted to Buddhism. These new converts made many images of the Buddha and other bodhisattvas, and for a while, Buddhism became known as a religion of images. During its growth, Buddhism went head-to-head with Confucianism and Taoism. The Taoists originally believed that the Buddha in India was actually a reincarnation of Master Lao Tzu, though they later rejected this notion when they realized the differences between Taoism and Buddhism. Confucians weren't as accepting of Buddhism as the Taoists were. Confucian philosophy centered on the king being a ruler and a sage, and Buddhism stated that anyone could be a sage. The Confucians believed that this equality could corrupt the ruler-subject relationship, and so rejected Buddhism. Buddhism was initially more popular than Confucianism because, during the 3rd century, philosophy became more popular, and people started questioning whether Confucianism was correct. As more Chinese philosophers arose, so did the belief in speculative metaphysics, which tried to separate different principles from their expression. Philosophers stated that principle could be understood best when it was first read, and the message was later misunderstood when trying to express that principle to another person. This philosophy relied heavily on 2 Taoist principles. The first was the Unmanifest Tao, which stated the Taoist ideal that there was an underlying non-being that was the cause of all being. The Manifest Tao stated that words cannot adequately describe reality or the Unmanifest Tao. As both Buddhism and Taoism gained popularity in China, they were soon mixed together to create Buddho-Taoism. This new philosophy stated that there was no single underlying principle in the universe, and that only a ruler could define what was right and what was wrong. They also believed that karma and rebirth were the moral structure of the universe, punishing those who did wrong and rewarding those who lived a pious life. In the end, Buddho-Taoists really realized that they understood very little of actual Buddhism, and the movement was soon abandoned. In the 3rd century, Buddhism became popular among scholars when a man named Kumarajiva was brought to China as bounty. He started a massive translation project with hundreds of monks, both translating new documents and correcting the older, more inaccurate translations of the 2nd century. During an invasion in 420 AD, the school of his disciples was destroyed and the monks were scattered throughout China, leading to the spread of many of Kumarajiva's ideas on Buddhism. During the same time, an awakening of faith in the Mahayana occurred. It was during this time that the doctrine of one mind first appeared, stating that all beings and consciousnesses were connected under one mind, and so individual people were but waves on the same singular ocean. When scholars wanted a comprehensive system for explaining the different sutras, they turned to the Mahayana Sutras, because the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism was more popular than mainstream Buddhism. It offered universal Buddhahood, and it was easily understood by even the most common of people. During the 4th century, China was divided into northern and southern rule. Because the Sangha was free from political rule, it became a safe haven for those on either side, leading to a widespread conversion of noble elites. The 4th century did see more improvements to Buddhism, though. It was during this time that the first nuns' order was established by Chu Qian and Fo Tuan Deng. Women were very overjoyed, as Buddhism allowed them a vocational life free from domestic duties. Their orders were more subject to political rule, though, as they were built within city limits. During the Sui dynasty, China was reunified. Emperor Wen Ti was the first emperor of the newly reunified China, and as a practicing Buddhist, he promoted his philosophy throughout the country. The reunification was a mixed blessing for the Sangha. The establishment became more subject to political rule because the country was no longer divided. Emperor Wen made a compromise, stating that its monks didn't need to pay deference to government officials, but the state had control. The Sui dynasty fell during the 6th century, but the Tang Dynasty rose to take its place. The Tang Dynasty would eventually become the golden age for Buddhism, though it didn't start out that way. The first ruler of the Tang Dynasty was Empress Wu, a concubine who rose to power. Because of her past and gender, she wasn't able to gain support from either the Taoists or Confucians, so she turned to the Buddhists for support, claiming to be the reincarnation of Maitreya. She won their favor by sponsoring many translations and donating a large sum of money to the Sangha. Eventually, Empress Wu was replaced by Hu Xuanzang, whose first task was to root out corruption within the Sangha. Many of the monastics in the Sangha had been ordained only to avoid taxation. Whole monasteries were also corrupt, as some acted as business enterprises, operating near open markets so as to receive more donations. In total, about 30,000 monks were defrocked during Hu Xuanzang's campaign. Despite the corruption, the Tang Dynasty saw the emergence of the first strictly Chinese Buddhist schools. One of the first schools was known as Tian Tai, called the Heavenly Terrace after the mountaintop in Zhejiang. It was founded by Qi Yi. The school tried to encompass all of the Buddhist teachings. Its teachings focused on the fact that theory and practice could not be separated, and so practice must go with studying in order to be awakened. 3 different ways of teaching arose. The first, sudden teachings, pointed directly toward the Dharma element, whereas the gradual teachings did not point directly towards it, but rather outlined a path to get to it. The variable teachings mixed both elements of gradual and sudden teachings, and to some it was the best path. The teachings focused on 3 discernments, the Abhidharma, the Madhyamaka, and the Dharma Dhatu. The main flaw of Tian Tai was that because it was all-encompassing, followers had to master all areas of doctrine and practice. The next school of Chinese Buddhism was Huayan. It was named after the Flower Ornament Sutra, which was the basis for most of the school's teaching. It differed from Tian Tai in that it believed in one vehicle, which was superior to the Sravaka, the Pratyeka Buddha, and the Bodhisattva, and it was the only means for enlightenment. The school shared many views with traditional Mahayana Buddhism, but it differed in what it called reality. Mahayana traditionally believed that reality was an unimpeded interpenetration of phenomena in principle, whereas the Huayan school believed that reality was the interpenetration of phenomena with all other phenomena. The school explained that reality was like a jeweled net. Each jewel reflected the jewels across and around it into infinity. The story explained that principle and phenomena cannot exist separately, and that all phenomena are identical and empty. From that, the school of Huayan taught that separate nirvana was impossible. If one person was to achieve nirvana, everyone else would have to achieve it at the same time. The 3-level sect took a completely different approach to Buddhism than any other school. The school believed that there were 3 Dharma ages, and that the one they were living in was known as the degenerate Dharma age. Because of this, the school did not teach Dharma, nor did they believe that anyone else could teach it, as they were most likely wrong. Everyone was equal in the degenerate Dharma age, and so no one could judge another. The only reliably true religious activity was to be generous. Because of this mentality, the inexhaustible treasury was established. All money donated to it was used to prepare temples and to take care of the sick and homeless. The treasury lasted for a couple of centuries, finally closing in 721 AD. Despite its general message of goodwill and generosity, the school ran into a lot of trouble with the Sangha. The 3-level sect's teaching that any Dharma taught was wrong included the Dharma taught by the Sangha, and they were not happy about this view. The final 2 schools were Qingtai and Qian. The Qingtai, or Pure Land School, was more of a movement than anything else. The main goal of Qingtai was to be born into a Buddha field so that one day the person could become a Buddha. The path to the Buddha field was much easier than any other tradition. Qingtai's main focus was Nianfo, which was chanting the Sanskrit name of the Buddha over and over again. The Qingtai school did not focus on sutras and other teachings because it too believed that it was a degenerate Dharma age, and so all teachings were lies. Faith was the prime directive toward nirvana. It gained much popularity in China because it taught that everyone, beggars, emperors, and even thieves, could be reborn into a Buddha field. The Chan or Zen school was also very popular in China. It was started by a popular Buddhist monk known as Bodhidharma. There are many stories about how the Chan school developed. The most widely accepted story was about how Hong Jian, the 5th patriarch of the school, chose the 6th patriarch. He stated that there was to be a poetry contest, and whoever poem best described Hong Jian's teachings would be the next patriarch. At first, only one poem was written. Shen Hui's poem stated that the body was a Bodhi tree, and the mind was a stand for the mirror of awakened awareness, where dust was to be removed continually. Huineng, an illiterate layman from the monastery's kitchen, wrote the second poem. In it he said that the tree did not exist, and nor did the mirror. Awakening was pure, so dust could never arise. Huineng was named the next patriarch, but he fled to escape the wrath of Shen Hui. For a while, 2 Chan schools existed. The northern school of Shen Hui taught a gradual approach to awakening, whereas Huineng's southern school focused on sudden awakening. The southern schools survived when the northern schools did not, making Chan focus on sudden awakening and rejecting gradual approaches. Over time, Chan developed many unorthodox methods of teaching. Teachers would shout and beat their students, hoping to shock them into awakening. The Tang Dynasty had many more troubled years. Rebellion and famine wreaked havoc on the country, and many monasteries were destroyed. The government soon stepped in. To gain money for the collapsing empire, they started ordaining anyone who could pay a flat fee into Buddhist monasteries. This led to a loosening of the rules for entering the Sangha, and the corruption that Hu Xuanzang tried to weed out came back. Another problem for the Buddhists during the Tang Dynasty was Emperor Wu. He was a strict Taoist seeking immortality, and he was told by other Taoists that this would never happen because of the Buddhists. During his campaign against Buddhism, he destroyed 4,600 temples, 40,000 shrines, and forced 260,500 people back into lay life. His reign was short-lived, though. The potions and elixirs that he had been taking to become immortal eventually poisoned him. The Buddhists capitalized on his death, attributing it to his bad karma. After Emperor Wu, the Huangqiao rebellion broke out, and though it was not directed at Buddhism, it pushed it back even further by destroying many of the schools that